Hello there, welcome to In My Opinion. Another year of gaming behind me. I beat about 43 games, which is not a bad number in my book, and I enjoyed a lot of them. Though with this being my top 10, be it backlog or brand new, not all of them are going to make it, though there'll be a decent amount of honorable mentions. One different thing I'm doing this time around is adding my biggest disappointment this year. I probably won't be doing this again, who knows, but I most likely won't be doing it again, but I had to do it for this year because this particular game disappointed me that much. Anywho, on to the list. So let's start with number 10, Steel Rising. The Dev Team Spiders has been really putting out some great games, even with the jank some can have. This was them trying a Souls-like game, and I think they did a pretty good job. I went with the build of elemental attacks, and I had a blast as I was electrocuting the enemy, though my favorite was the ice batons. I thought the enemy designs were creative, especially the bosses, and Aegis herself was well designed. And I like how you could customize her look. I also found myself more interested in her personal mystery compared to the French Revolution backdrop. The combat has teeth to it as every encounter felt like you could easily die in a few hits if you screwed up. It's also one of the most welcoming Souls-like games as you can customize the difficulty. I personally turn off the mechanic of dropping your currency to level up and such, as that always bugged me in other Souls-like games I played. So if you want to dip your toes in a Souls-like game, this is the perfect one. Number 9, Fist, Forge, and Shadow Torch. This Metroidvania game that takes place in a world with walking, talking animals ended up being really fun. The characters were likable, and I really dug our lead's design. It gives you multiple weapon attachments you unlock through the game, starting with your fist to stuff like a drill and whip. The combat is also a blast, letting you pull off combos and launchers to continue said combos, and you can even switch up weapons during combos, allowing for some creativity. It also helps that each attack felt nice and meaty, and killing the enemies felt like a spectacle. Each area also has some pretty creative designs with fun bosses. A sequel would be nice as it feels like there's much more to this game's story. Number 8, Yomawari Lost in the Dark. It's the third entry to this game series, and it looks like they are still bringing the goods. The mystery behind the story caught my interest, and like the games before, the atmosphere is just fantastic. While we do see some of the usual spirits in the series, there are plenty of new ones with horrifying designs, especially the bosses, and even Slender Man drops by. Exploring this scary ass town is enjoyable, and there is plenty of secrets to find, and the game never becomes frustrating even though you can die in a single hit. If you like horror, then you should buy this. All I know is if they keep bringing these out, I'll keep buying them. Number 7, Heaven Dust 2. Yep, another horror title, though while the last one's about running for your life with no weapons, this is the opposite. This is more for those who enjoy classic Resident Evil games as you'll be blasting zombies and other bio creatures. This one takes place right after the first, but I don't think you need to play the first to get what's going on. Besides killing stuff, this one has some really good puzzles that will make you test your brain a little bit. So if you're kinda hungry for that in your horror titles, it delivers. The gunplay is also satisfying as the sound and visual of zombies' heads popping is fantastic. You also are rewarded for exploring, gaining some powerful firepower, which comes in handy when you're facing some nicely designed bosses. Number 6, Kirby in the Forgotten Land. Kirby's first walk into full 3D turned out great. It's the same Kirby fun with you inhaling and getting powers. Not only that, but the addition of getting upgraded versions of the powers made using them never dull. The new mechanic of having Kirby morph into shapes like stairs and cars was a great idea executed perfectly, since not only each functioned well, but the game doesn't go half-assed with it as you'll be using it a lot. The levels are fun to go through and they are pretty creative, not only in gameplay but visuals as well. So yeah, this Kirby game is cute and one hell of a good time. Number 5, Wanted Dead. This one seemed to get a mixed reaction, but I definitely fall on the love it side. So much so that I beat it on epic difficulty, so that's about 4 times. It's a hack and slash that has you wielding a sword and some firearms. It's also pretty challenging, but not in a cheap way, as I felt like my deaths were on me. The game may feel a bit weird at first, but once you get into the rhythm of the combat, it's extremely satisfying when you overcome the odds. Not to mention, there's a shitload of blood and violence, which makes taking out enemies even more fun. The story and characters are also a bit quirky, but in a good way, and they're likable. The voice acting can come off the same way, but it just fits, especially with the lead. All of this comes off pretty charming, and I would really love a sequel. Number 4, Dawn of the Monsters. I love me some kaiju and I love me some beat 'em ups, and combining these two ended up being a fantastic idea. The gameplay is fun and impactful, making for a gratifying feeling when you beat the living crap out of your enemies and watch them explode. The 4 characters you get to use feel different from one another, making switching around worth a while. I remember seeing the characters and just going, I'll stick to these two, but I found myself rotating a lot of times, enjoying them all. The world and its characters are also interesting and entertaining. The visuals are also a treat for the eyes, especially if you like anime and cel shading. If you end up playing this and enjoying it, I would also recommend the DLC. Number 3, Cyberpunk 2077. This is a game that face planted on release and got back up, cleaned itself off, and became amazing. I was so sucked into this world, and Johnny, even while flawed, grew on me. Of course, he's not the only character, as I can't forget my girl Panam, who's just badass. There's a crazy amount of side content, and even the smallest task has some story behind it. You got stuff like a rogue AI, becoming a boxing champ, a father and son's dark secret, a doctor living by her code, a woman being committed to a psych hospital against her will, and a whole shitload more. Even the cyber psychos you have to take down have some story to them. Of course, this is a game of choice, and not only in dialogue, but how to tackle all your encounters. So it can go in guns blazing, or sneaky, or maybe found an alternative route. You really get a sense of freedom, and thankfully the combat is a shitload of fun, and go by your stats you can do certain builds, like being a tech master hacking people's brain and overloading them and such. Or just go brute force, or maybe slice and dice melee. Me personally, I had a big strength build with big guns and a little bit of tech sprinkle that let me be a little sneaky in certain situations. The game ran fine with only a few tech hiccups and over 100 hours of playtime. Mind you, this is during when the big update happened when the next gen console versions were released, and not the recent giant upgrade with the Phantom Liberty expansion. So if anything, it's most likely even better now. Number 2, Spider-Man 2. I loved the first Insomniac Spider-Man game, so much so I even played the remaster to get ready for the sequel, and I have to say it didn't disappoint. I thought the story was great, even with some of its odd scenes, and seeing Peter's relationship with Harry and the struggle of balancing Spidey life, starting a company, and getting more serious with MJ was entertaining. The big bad Kraven felt like a good new threat, and speaking of threats, this game's version of Venom was a treat and he makes quite the impact. The combat is more the combat of the last game, just smoother, which isn't a bad thing. And since you can play with Peter or Miles, they made them feel different from one another, such as Peter's robo arms and Miles' venom powers. And you get even more powers as the game goes along. There's a ton of costumes you can unlock, with most being pretty big winners in my book, like Noir Peter and City Sound Miles. I also like that some of the outfits actually change the color of Peter's robo arms to fit in more. There's also a ton of side missions to tackle and things to collect, with some side missions being exclusive to Peter or Miles. And I have to say most of Miles' exclusive ones are pretty crap, like helping some classmates and one where you play as a girl he likes, which was extremely boring and should have been just a cutscene. Good thing is some side missions can also be played with either Peter or Miles, so Miles can get some good side missions if you want to use them. I will also say they improved the MJ sections by doing what I thought they should, which was let her keep the stun gun. Even though something at the end kinda worries me for the most likely part 3, it didn't kill my overall enjoyment of this entry. Now let's get a little negative here and go on to the disappointment. Mortal Kombat 1. I'm not gonna go full-blown spoilers here, and if you want that, you can check out my Rambo review, but my god, this game is depressing. A story mode that started off decent but fell off a cliff, not much content for single player with only invasions, a boring mess of a mode being around, tech issues, less customization options, and more. The only positive is the gameplay is fun, but that doesn't cut it, especially since I had fun with Mortal Kombat 11's gameplay, and that had more in it even in its base form. Okay, back to the positives with some honorable mentions. Wife Quest. This ended up being a fun platformer, and what's more surprising was the fact that the boss battles actually had some teeth to them, making for a fun challenge. I say if you don't mind some crude humor, it's worth a play. Costume Quest 1 and 2. These two RPGs are not only cute, but enjoyable and pretty inviting, as anyone, even newcomers, can jump right in and not feel overwhelmed by it. Both are also great games to play during the Halloween season, as both focus around it and do a good job using the holiday. World's End Club. If you're looking for an adventure game with some platforming, some puzzles, and an enjoyable story about friendship, this is it. I also really like the anime aesthetic and the unique character designs. If I had any complaints, I just wish there was more gameplay to it, as this is a heavy story focused game. Phantom Breaker Omnia. I fired I picked up kind of randomly, and it ended up being pretty fun. You can pull off some cool combos and not even be some fighting game pro, and there's 2 types of fighting styles you can pick that changes up your supers. I feel the roster is pretty good, and I was able to find some characters I enjoyed using, like this one with a bullet stick. It just sucks that online is dead, though there is a story mode for each character, and it's not a bad length. Also surprisingly, the game has a full English dub with even a catchy intro and ending theme, which is appreciated. Night at the Gates of Hell. This zombie horror game is a nod to Italian zombie horror flicks, like City of the Living Dead, and if you're into those movies, you should pick this one up, as it feels like playing through one with plenty of blood, violence, and even some humor. That is if the visual style doesn't bug you. West of Dead. This western themed roguelike has some fantastic visuals and great gameplay. While it eases you in, you'll be in some hectic shootout soon enough. And it doesn't feel overly difficult, just enough that it challenges you. But it never becomes frustrating, and there's some kick-ass guns here. Nickelodeon Kart Racers 3. I was surprised by how fun this Nick-themed arcade racer turned out to be. Since when something is licensed, especially cartoon related, there's a good chance it will suck. It has a good roster with Toph being a favorite, and there's a lot of customizations with car parts and powers. There's also a good amount of content with races, challenges, and unlockable characters. And it even got enough of a budget to add voices, which I feel is pretty important. And my number one, Final Fantasy 16. Man, what a game. I loved the story it had to tell, not to mention it had not only a really likable lead in Clive, but the rest of the cast were no slouches like Sid and Joe, who get development time as well. There's also a ton of world building in the game, which makes everything you experience that much better. Besides the main plot, a lot of this world building comes from the side quests as well, and some of these make you go, damn, this is pretty messed up here. The combat is enjoyable as well, and once I got used to timing my dog attacks, it got better, and it was just really fun sending enemies flying or just juggling them. Not to mention messing with all the icon powers you gain as you play. Mixing them up, finding out what worked for me, like freezing the enemy and then gaining fireballs that surround me and continuously hit the enemy. I just never got bored with it. This game also has some of the most epic boss fights I've encountered, like holy shit. And I would think there's no way they could top the one I just did, and then the next one came and it was just as awesome. It just floored me. One of the things I liked here as well is unlike Final Fantasy 15, where there was a bunch of side projects you had to experience like other games, anime, and so on to get the most out of it, Final Fantasy 16 just tells everything in the game, no side stuff needed, thank God. It seemed like they learned from their lesson. Also, there's a shit ton of content to mess around with here as well. Even with some of its frame rate issues, mainly being during exploration, since in combat it's smooth as butter, this game just wowed me from beginning to end credits and was one hell of an experience. So yeah, that's the list for 2023. I know this is a bit late, my bad, but I hope you got some enjoyment out of this. And if you have any personal favorites from 2023, please share them. And as always, for gamer's sake, keep gaming.